To be joined by another journalist, Adriana Cerretelli, the Brussels correspondent from the Italian Il Sole 24 Ore. She will be joining us alongside President of the EPP group in the European Parliament and President of the EPP itself. I believe she is joining us on the stage here. Please have a seat, indeed.
Wherever you like. Hello.
It's lovely to see you here. Thank you for joining us in the studio.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Buonasera. Buonasera.
Piacere.
Oh, excuse me. And we are just waiting for President Daul to also join us on the panel. And we're just having a discussion about what we've seen so far, the exit polls, what the indications seem to be. I'm sure you've been following them as well. Is there anything you're particularly surprised at from what you've seen so far?
No, unfortunately not. I would have hoped that the Eurosceptic would not be so successful, but apparently they are. So we have to wait for the final results. But
you are leaving out the Mr. Wilders' performance in the Netherlands, for example.
yes.
Why is that? Why do you leave that out when you talk about being disappointed at the strength of the relative strength of the Eurosceptics?
Yes, it is true that Wilders was disappointing for the Eurosceptics force. But at the same time, I think that Le Pen, if it is confirmed first in France, ahead of UMP and with the socialists, had really an historical defeat. I think that this is not a good signal. Generally speaking, for the balance of power in Europe.
What message does that send to the mainstream center-left and center-right parties, knowing that a force like that is going to be coming into Parliament?
But I think that I know that my judgment, my opinion is not so politically correct, but I think that the reason why the Eurosceptics are increasing so much everywhere in Europe, it is because the traditional parties were not able to understand the problems, the sentiment,
And the President of the EPP group in the European Parliament and President of the EPP, Mr. Joseph Daul, please have a seat with us.
I stay here?
Yes.
Bonsoir. Monsieur Daul, bienvenue. Bienvenue. Bien sûr.
Now, of course, at the moment, all we're seeing are the exit polls. We don't have the final results yet. So it may be a little bit difficult to extrapolate from that. But it appears that the EPP will remain in the lead at the Parliament. Is that true? How do you see things? Now, the EPP will most likely be losing seats, but how do you see things at the moment? Well, looking at the indications, and you know that I'm a very cautious man. We have to be very cautious and wait for the final count. But looking at things at the moment, I think what I'm most pleased about is that in the smaller countries where we have results from, we have kept our position and even made gains in some places. So I think that it seems that Jean-Claude Juncker will be the Commission candidate. We have won the elections for the fourth time. We've lost a few seats, but given the difficult times we're living through, I think we have managed to hold our ground. And all of our campaign over the last few weeks, as you can see, I'm losing my voice a little, but all of our campaigning over the last few weeks is very promising. And what I'd like to say is what I've always said in my group, and I'm very happy this evening because this was the room where I've actually presided over the group. What I would like to say is that once again, in countries where we have stuck to our values, we've continued to defend our values, and there we have managed to maintain our position. In countries where we're moving slightly towards populism and moving towards other countries, we have actually lost. We're going to be joined by Enrique Zabetto, another journalist. He's going to be joining us for our discussions here. Apologies for interrupting. Well, I think for the big parties such as the Christian Democrats, what we need to do is stick to our values, to continue to fight for our values, and that's how we will continue to find our base. If we move towards populism, then we will lose elections, and I think that here, once again, this shows that.
Oui, bien sûr, on a présenté Eric.
Have we introduced Eric? Well, yes, I had another question. I know that you're going to be very important in the negotiations in deciding who will be Commission President. You're going to play a very important role in that. From what we can see in not the final results, but the polls so far, are you still confident that Mr. Juncker will be the next Commission President? Or do you think there is still a chance that the European Council will decide otherwise? I can't imagine any serious head of state or government who has explained that if we win the elections, then Jean-Claude Juncker will be head of the Commission, will then say at the end of next week or the week after, to say in front of me with my presence, no, that's no longer possible. I think that centre-right heads of state and government are serious people, and they will support Mr. Juncker. Adriana has a question now. You say that the EPP looks like it's going to be the lead party. You don't know exactly what the differences will be, the socialists yet. But my impression is that with these elections, the Eurosceptics have made significant gains. And that's going to be something new in these elections. As the president of the biggest group in the parliament, how do you think you're going to handle this phenomenon in the assembly? Well, if you look at the polls and the results which are coming in, the democratic parties within the parliament are going to keep the vast majority of seats. But what about the political signals that are coming out of these countries? Well, now we have to see if they're able to form a group within the parliament. So far, it's been too easy for them. They've been able to take their money. They haven't had to form a group. They've just been able to take their money and go away again without doing anything. Well, on what you've just said about the centre-right parties sticking to their principles and not moving towards the populists or the extremist parties. But I would support that, but I would just like to ask what your impression of is what's happened in your country, in France. At the moment, I think that there's a very worrying scenario coming out of France. Well, I would say that as a Frenchman, I'm sad. This image is not representative of France. I'm French, I'm from Alsace, and this makes me even sadder. If you look at history, and as I've said to many of you during the election campaign, populism leads to chaos and war, and I'm deeply saddened by what I see happening in the Balkans, in Ukraine, and what will start to happen here if we start to cultivate hatred. I'm thinking in particularly with a view to the families of the victims here recently in Belgium. This is what hatred does. We have to fight this hatred. We have to fight these parties who want to govern in this way. So I'm saddened for France this evening. In the next Conference of Presidents in the upcoming days, will you be present? Do you think that Mr. Schulz will lead that meeting? What do you think is going to happen in that meeting? Well, we'll meet. It's on Tuesday. We'll meet in the Conference of Presidents. It will be the former presidents who will meet because the new ones haven't yet been elected. We'll look at the results of the elections and see what we can do to work and how the democratic parties can work together. I just wanted to come back to the fact that you're saddened by what's happened in France. How do you explain this? If you have this kind of hatred in a country, where does this hatred come from? You're a democracy. In Italy, we have Grillo. Perhaps that could also be termed as hatred to an extent. But do you think that the traditional parties have let the people down? Or do you think that they haven't given society the impression that they can solve their problems? Otherwise, how do you explain this type of populism, extremism, having such success in a democratic society? You can look at Austria as well. It's a prosperous, a rich country. Why should this be the case? Well, you know me. I think that the government which is currently in place, they think that it's the right who voted for the National Front. Of course, there have been some of the right who voted for the National Front, but actually the people who've lost the most have been the socialists. So what that means is that for the last 2.5 years, we have been falling, we haven't taken any real decisions, and people are very disappointed. Then if you look at the local elections, it was in the formerly left cities that they've made gains, not in the right cities. I haven't seen the latest polls. You might know more than me. We've lost out because the UDI wasn't with us. If you take both together, we're not actually that far behind what we gained last time at European election. Last time we had about 29.3, and the UDI were with us in the European election. So we've lost a little bit. But I think that what we can see is that when I was campaigning, I was saying, look, that's enough. France is not going to be governed by the National Front. We spoke to people in the meetings and explained this to them. But do you think that the government should bring the elections forward? We're seeing in Le Monde today, Jean-Marie Le Pen is saying that we have to dissolve the National Assembly. Would you agree with that? Well, today we've had European elections. I've already answered elsewhere as to whether the Bulgarian government should stand down. It's not my place here in Europe to say whether government should be standing down. As I was saying, I've already answered a Bulgarian journalist today who asked me whether I think the Bulgarian government should stand down today. I said, that's not my concern. We're in Europe here. Now, we have serious problems with the government in France and within the government in France. But that being the case, it's up to them to take those kind of decisions. It's not my place. We have to respect democracy. The worst thing that could happen would be for democracy not to be respected. So it's for each government to take their own responsibility. Now, some people say that this is endangering peace if we're to go down this road. Now, in economic crises in the past, we've seen that there is a risk of falling into war when people find themselves in these kind of situations. It's nothing new. It was the case in 1939, in 1914. So how can we tell our societies that they have peace because of Europe? And it's not Europe's fault that they have these problems. It's the exact opposite. What can we do to explain that? Well, I think you said that very well. and you chose the right words. How can we explain that? I'm trying to explain it. I'm trying to publish articles to explain this, but I think in 15 years I've managed to get 2 articles out to explain this. So correctly, you said, how can we explain this to French people, to Europeans, what Europe does, how it works? I think you're quite right. We need to communicate. We have to be honest with our citizens and explain why we take whichever decisions we do. Look at Mr. Zomdovsk. His country was bankrupt. He came to my office and said, I can't pay salaries at the end of the month. I can't pay pensions. He was asking, people asked the IMF, and wages and pensions, he was told, would have to be cut by 20%. He said, I've only just arrived, and if I can't do this, then if you don't stand with me, then the only option for me to will be to stand down, and then you won't have your salaries or your pensions. And then just look at the results he got today. I'm very happy for him. But that takes political courage. And as I've said, real politicians have to think about their next elections. But a real head of state or a real true politician is one that should try to solve problems. With the rise in Euroscepticism in Europe, not just France, don't you think that one of the reasons for that is the way in which the euro crisis was handled? So, for instance, don't you think that people have had to make huge sacrifices without seeing any drop in debt at the end of it? They've made, I think, excessive sacrifices. The effort hasn't been done on a sliding scale. There's been unemployment. And at the end of all of this, we haven't really met the objective. We haven't managed to cut the debt. What do you think about that? Your party is in favour of fiscal consolidation. Well, we only have 5 minutes before you have to leave us. Firstly, the first thing we have to remember, which I've said throughout the election campaign, particularly in France, remember that at one point we couldn't even guarantee savings because of the crisis from the United States. And it was thanks to Europe and the euro. Of course, we have given money to banks, but I said to Mr. Sarkozy, when we were in the middle of the crisis, I said, Nicholas, the first thing that we have to guarantee are savings accounts. These are people who've worked all their lives, like my parents, who all they had was a bit of money in their saving accounts, and they weren't guaranteed. So we had to make sure that that was guaranteed throughout the financial crisis. If you look at Iceland's, we were much better off. That's the first point to remember. The second point is I am also a businessman. And I know that if you're spending more than you're earning, then you have to find some kind of solution. Otherwise, the bank's not going to finance you anymore. And I think that politicians haven't understood that. That's what balance mean. They say a state isn't like a business. A state is different. You have taxes. But you can only collect taxes as long as the economy allows it. So you have to make sure that things are much calmer and much healthier. 4 or 5 years ago, I was saying what you have to do is to make sure that everyone is making their own savings. Everyone's playing their part. And you can't spend more than you're earning. Thank you for being here, President, we have to say goodbye to you for the moment, but I'm sure good luck this evening. I think we'll be continuing to celebrate later on this evening.
Ask you both to stay.